We're going to continue just talking about the body a little bit. Now, we went through a lot last week, and we kind of established that there was the physical body that is in this physical world, and we also saw that there were different heavens, and the scriptures specifically told us there were three heavens, and that's where Yahweh dwelt in the third heavens. It also says that Yahweh dwells in the heavens of heavens. Now, the scripture also showed us that there are different bodies. The earthly body, that's a body. And you have not only earthly bodies, but you also have physical bodies that function in the earth, but they're not subject to the laws, if you will, that governs the physical body. The physical body that we have. For instance, you have Melchizedek that came in, and he projected himself into the physical world, and he stayed here for a certain time, but his body, even though it was physical, it has a different glory than our body, the body that we have, because he could move out, in and out, whatever, because he clothed himself in a body to function in this physical world amongst those who were here. He didn't necessarily have to, but to function around everyone, that everyone could see him and know him. He caused them to see that frequency, that he was able to dwell amongst them and live amongst them and touch and be felt just in the same manner. Well, that body wasn't spirit. Yes, there was spirit in that body, but that body wasn't a spirit body. It was a physical body, but it wasn't the same as our physical body. Now, if you remember Yahshua also had a physical body. After he was resurrected and returned in the upper room that everybody had the doors closed, he came through the door, and the door was locked, but he still came through it. Well, that was also a physical body. That body was much like Melchizedek's body. That's the body that everyone who is redeemed, that they're going to be receiving, because they'll be of the same priesthood of Melchizedek, and they will come into the earth, and they won't come into the earth clothed in a light body. They'll come in clothed in a physical body. And if you know, Yekitzke talks about those of Zadok who will be proven righteous, then they will take off their garment when they go outside of the temple or the tabernacle or the area, so that they do not sanctify anybody. Well, this is not talking about a temple like in Jerusalem. It's talking about the temple that is above, where that priesthood will be residing at. But when they come into the earth, they won't come in with their light body, because they won't do anything to cause the people who are developing in this earth, to cause them to move off course, that they don't learn all that they have to learn. Because if you think about it, the job is to sanctify everyone, but not to sanctify them in the way that we do something that causes them not to develop totally. It's like we don't want to take someone from the third grade and put them in college, because then they miss everything between there and they don't know how to tie everything together. So in that mode, they would be sanctifying them. Melchizedek came into the earth. He didn't come in light body, came in with a physical body, and he wasn't going to cause anyone to be moved beyond where they were capable of going at the time, or move them in an area that they would not experience what they needed to experience for their proper growth or their development. So you had Yahshua, who came through the door, and if you remember Yahshua, he told Timothy to put his finger in his hands where the nail was. And he says, this is not a spirit, he said. He was telling him that this is a physical body that he was in, but that wasn't him. He was clothed in that. He took on that body. Because remember also that Yahshua became a life-giving spirit. So the life-giving spirit is actually what is in this individual, in the core. And as he moved through the different worlds, he put on a body for that world. So when he came into the earth, he didn't have a spirit body. He had a physical body that he told Timothy, touch this, because this is not a spirit, he said. He was trying to let him know this is a physical body, but that physical body wasn't the same physical body as you had Timothy and the rest of the apostles and all of us having today. It was different because he had already inherited the priesthood. He was just like Melchizedek again, able to go in and out as he pleased. When he came before Shaul and he dealt with Shaul, Shaul testified, he said, he met this man and he don't know if this man was in the physical or if this man was in the spirit. He don't know because, he couldn't really see. So this is indicating to us that individuals such as Melchizedek and Yahshua and those who will be redeemed from among men, they will be able to function in multi-bodies, in multi-dimension, because that's what they have. They have the power that they always had from the very beginning, right after the only begotten Son put together all those spirits, and actually the Father and the Son would have their will, and the Father's Spirit would move through those 7 spirits also. And so the Father would live in them and be the creative force behind it, and the only begotten Son would be there too, because this is what you would have. You have the Father and the Son that would dwell in all of their creation. But in our world, something happened that caused the Father and the Son to not be awake in us. But the Father and the Son is awakened in those who are called sons of Yahweh. Those who are still children, they're not awakened to that yet. So what we're looking at are these different bodies. And in all these different heavens, they have different glories. The mental heaven has one glory, and that's a world all to itself. The second heaven, with the different levels of it, they have different glories amongst those. Just as you have a physical body, and you had one like Melchizedek that was physical, or Yahshua that was physical, and you have our kind of body that was also physical, but they have different glories. And then you have the third heaven, which also has a different glory than the second heaven, and a different glory than our mental heaven. These are different bodies that we're looking at. Now, how it works, you have the Father who is source. We spoke about this before, but I just want to go through all this and then get back to where we kind of left off at. You had the Father who is source. And the Father begets or begot a Son, an only begotten Son, through his very own Spirit. Because the Spirit that he has is called life. It's personified as wisdom in our scripture. And through that, he begot the only begotten Son. Now the Father and his Spirit, or source and source Spirit, lives in the Son, continues to live in the Son. Because the Father has life within himself, he puts it into the only begotten Son. The only begotten Son has that same Spirit, but the only begotten Son is bringing forth the Father's will. So the Father is living in the Son. That's the Father who is living in the Son. So when the Son creates, then what you have is the Father's will goes into the creation, and you have that very same Spirit, which is the Father's, that also the Son brought forth in the creation that he's creating, all the way down to us. And so in the scriptures now, we have been cut off in certain aspects, but we need the tabernacle of Yahweh, if you will. The tabernacle is where Yahweh dwells. This is the second heaven, and all the bodies, their bodies that's there. The second heaven, which is the higher self. So you have the second heaven now that we need to open things up to in order for us to receive what is in the second heaven. And when we do, because the tabernacle of Yahweh is in the second heaven. That's where Yahweh resides. He resides in all the third heavens, all the second heavens. And so we've been cut off in this physical world here that we're in, but we need to do things that we will be opened up again to receive the Spirit of our Father, and our Father would also dwell in us once more. That's why it says the tabernacle of Yahweh is with men. The tabernacle is where Yahweh dwells. It is the house of the living Father, all the way from the beginning where Source has brought forth his Spirit, put it in the Son, brought forth the Son, all that coming down through all the worlds down into us. And with us, when we are able to open the channels back up, that the Father and the Son could dwell in us, or the tabernacle of the Father could be with men. And so the Spirit of our Father and the only begotten Son will be living in this physical world here, because everyone will be conscious and expressing the Father, no different than it's happening in the higher worlds. That's what Yahshua's prayer was all about. And his prayer telling us how to pray, that the will of whatever is in heaven will be done on earth, because that's what the whole thing is for. That's what he came in here for. That's what all the sons are here to do, to awaken man, that man will be able to do the things that he needed to do to align his bodies. And when he aligns his bodies, then the Spirit of the Father and the Son will make their home in that physical individual. And that physical individual will bring forth that expression in the earth, and therefore you will have the saying that the tabernacle of our Father is with men. So as we looked at certain things here, we kind of left off at 1 Corinthians 15, that he was talking about how the bodies are sown. And it says that the body that is natural, the physical body here that we have, the natural body, it is sown in corruption. Well, the corruption that he's talking about is not just dishonesty or something like that. Yes, that could also be considered corruption. But the corruption is that which is also subject to death. That's also what is considered corruption. Because if it has the life of the Father, it is not subject to death. But if there's some kind of disorder or corruption that has come in it, then all of a sudden it's cut off from the life of the Father, and therefore it becomes corrupt. It's like you have your computer that has a corrupt sector or corrupt disk or whatever the case is. It becomes messed up in that system or in that computer that we have. So as you go on and continue to look at this corruption that is talking about here is really just bringing us to the place that is showing us that we are cut off because of what we allow ourselves to take in, or to be harnessed within ourselves. Now, Yahshua came in now to show us how to get past that corruption, that we may have life and have this life more abundantly, and that we will be able to save ourselves. Because he's not saving us except through the example that he died and left for us to follow. That's going to be our sacrifice. That's going to be our peace offering. Our burnt offering is not going to be an animal that these offerings are going to be. It wasn't before, and it's not going to be after a while. Those are all symbols. So let's go ahead and move to 1 Corinthians 15. Let's go over there and look at this real quick. 1 Corinthians 15. And we're going to pick up in verse 42. So it says, so also is the resurrection of the dead. Now it's not talking about dead people coming out of graves. There are dead that is talking about. Yahshua says, let the dead bury the dead. That's the dead he's talking about. The ones who are burying their physically dead. The ones who are unaware. In the resurrection of those who are totally unaware of what's happening, that can't add everything up because the Spirit hasn't given it to them. The Spirit of truth has not led them to the truth. So they're still considered dead. It says it's sown in corruption. It is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor. That's the earthly body. And it is raised in glory, or it is resurrected in glory. It is sown in weakness. The weakness that we have from the desire body, the passions and desires that's in our members, that has corrupted our mental body and has brought us down. And of course, that's where the ego has been corrupted also in this mental world. So we are weak in this sense. And based upon our weakness, we haven't done the things that we need to do to cause the tabernacle of our Father to come in through the mental, from the higher self into the mental body. And so the mental body will be governing the passions and desire in those worlds coming down to our physical body. Today, our passions and desires hijacked our minds. And we live in this world today based upon our passions and desires. And the passion is considered the female principle, and the mental body is considered the male principle. Now there's a fight that's going on, and the same thing you find in the earth today. Men and women can't come together because something has happened that the genders in this physical world, they don't know what's really happening, but they seem to be opposing each other. And it's happening more and more and more in this earth because those who actually know what's going on don't want oneness to come in. They don't want unity. What they want to do more than anything else is to create division. And they do it subtly because the serpent is more subtle than any beast of the field. And the serpent is the god of this world. So it's working very hard over time. And it's not going to be removed until a certain time. So in this, now, it's weakness in our minds, in our determination. However, it's raised in power. This power that it's raised in is that inheritance that we were looking at, that the priest would inherit. This power is your Father in heaven. It's Yahweh, the only power. This is what it comes down to. So it's raised. It inherits this great power. And it does it based upon the fruits that it has lived, that Yahshua has shown us how to live. In verse 44, it says, it is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. It is sown a natural body, and it is raised a spiritual body. Now, when it says spiritual body, we have to look at that. Because the spiritual body is not necessarily spirit body. The spiritual body is talking about a body that could move through all dimensions, because it's multidimensional, and it could function in this physical world with a body that is spiritual, but nevertheless it is physical. Just as Yahshua's body, or Melchizedek's body, or Adam's body before he fell, it was a spiritual body, but it was physical. And they could move into different dimensions and put that body down and take on another body. And so it's raised that body. That's what we had before. Because now it's talking about the resurrection and what the physical body is sowed in and what it will take on. It will take on a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. In verse 45, it says, and so it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. That living being that he became was the same kind of living being that Yahshua was showing in the earth. He became a living being, and the last Adam, a life-giving spirit. Because before he came into this earth as a living being, he was a life-giving spirit. And so that's what he's being redeemed to. Because remember, this is the resurrection. That's why they're comparing this. As it is written, one became a living being. Now in the resurrection, he becomes a life-giving spirit. That life-giving spirit lives or can function in different bodies, multidimensional, as Yahshua showed us. Now let's go over to Romans 8. Romans chapter 8. And look at verse 22. Romans chapter 8 and verse 22. And so we see here it says, for we know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the labor of childbirth right up to the present time. The creation has been moving forth in this childbirth, so they haven't actually been born into this level that is talking about that would not be subject to corruption or emptiness. So we're going to be born into this new mode of living. Now, the sons that are here first, or who has fallen with Adam, they're going to be resurrected first. Then you have those who come afterwards, because they're going to free the rest of the creation. So, but they are groaning, and they're laboring for childbirth. And not only they, but we ourselves. Now he's talking about the creation, and he's talking about we ourselves. There's two different classifications here. So we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit. The first fruits of the Spirit grown inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption of the redemption, or the adoption, the redemption of our body. Or you can say our bodies. Now, this body that is talking about is the body that we had previously. As we've talked about many times, we can't redeem something unless we have lost it. As Adam became a living being, so did we. As he will become a life-giving spirit once again in a whole different body and be able to function in different bodies, in different dimensions, so will we. And when we do that again, there's going to be a first fruit that does it. Okay, and hopefully we're amongst that first fruit that does it. And that first fruit, they will inherit the priesthood of Melchizedek. There'll be a Melchizedekian priesthood, if you will. And that priesthood will be totally opened up, that they will have inherited the same power that is in source. As Yahshua said, the scripture showed us that Yahshua, finding himself equal to Yahweh, did not think that it was something to be seized upon, but he humbled himself, taking the form of a servant, because he had awakened to what he was, where he had come from, the fact that the Father was living in him, the fact that the Son was living in him, and the fact that that Spirit was living in him, and they were functioning in him. He was awake to that. So in the resurrection of our bodies, this is what we will take on again. Now let's go over to Revelations 14 and let's look at verse 3. And here it says, and they sang as it were a new song. Now these who are singing, these are the ones who have the Father's name and the Son's name, or Messiah awareness, written in their foreheads. Now if you go to verse 1, it'll show you that. Let's go to verse 1. It says, and I looked, and behold, the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. And we talked about the mountain already. This is the highest region. And with him 144,000 having his name and the Father's name, which is not just a name. These are the characteristics, the reputation. This is talking about the glory of the Father, the same glory, the 13 perfect standards that we looked at in Exodus 34. This is actually what these have, and it's written in their foreheads. Now, the forehead is where you have what we call the third eye. So this is opened up to them, and so they are intuitive to this. They have intuition. Some you may want to call in this earth, they may have psychic power, but it's not a power that is unstable. Because you could have these powers and it could be unstable because we don't have a foundation. But if we have a foundation, it is stable because we know exactly what the situation is. They are clear audience, so they could hear. They could hear spirit. So this is written in their foreheads, and the forehead is where you have the third eye, if you will. It's that same chakra that would be called the sixth chakra. In verse 3 again, and they sang. Now this song that they're singing, it's not a song that we hear these people in Hollywood, whatever, singing. No, this is how they, this is the performance. This is what they perform day and night. This is how they live. They sang a song, they're performing something. This is how they live. And the song, it was as it was a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders, and no man could learn how they were living and what they were performing in their lives except for that 144,000. Notice who they are, who were redeemed from the earth. So they didn't have a physical body anymore like our physical body. They had a physical body like they had before they fell, because they were redeemed back to that body. And that body was what you could call, they were multi-dimensional individuals that could live in different worlds. And in each of these worlds that they lived in, they were able to function in a body for that world. Now there's more than just 7 worlds, because how you have it is you have a world or a dimension, and then you'll have sub-dimensions or sub-worlds to that. And in these worlds you have different densities and sub-densities. And in them you have sub-sub-worlds and sub-sub-densities and sub-sub-sub-worlds to infiniteness. And these are still being created. When Yahshua said, in my Father's house there are many mansions, my Father's house is my Father's body. We all live and have our being in this body, this universal body. Everybody is in. And there's still rooms, if you will, or places that's being prepared or created, because it's still expanding. It's still happening. In my Father's house there are many mansions. I go to prepare a place that where I am, you may be also. If it wasn't so, I would have told you. This is what he's talking about. And so, in 14, we go to verse 4 now. These were the ones who were not defiled with women. Now, when you see that, we got to wonder what this women is. Because this women here is plural, but really it's a collective force. This women that is talking about is the same woman that we were looking at in Genesis that caused the fall when Eve was deceived by that same serpent. That serpent was a female principle that was ruling in this earth, and it was supposed to bring forth the power or the nutrition of the Father right in this world. But it chose to do something else. Adam and Eve was supposed to come in and replenish this thing, and this woman, if you will, which is called women here, defiled them. And so here is the fall. And we've been under that subjection ever since. However, in the resurrection, those who are going to be resurrected from amongst men, they won't fall for this anymore. They're going to be free from that principle that has created the deception in this earth and has imprisoned everybody. They're going to be free from that. So these are the ones who are not defiled by women. Here it says forbidden assemblies, but it's not necessarily that. For they are virgins. These are the ones, this is how they come out now, who follow the Lamb wherever the Lamb goes. This is how they are freed from that vibration. These were redeemed from among men, the first fruits. They have the first fruits of the Spirit. So they're the ones who move first, and then they're going to redeem through their teachings the others, but they have a different body. They're the first fruits to Yahweh and to the Lamb, and therefore Yahweh and the Lamb, or the only begotten Son, could function through them in this earth, because the tabernacle of Yahweh will be with men in them, and they will be functioning in this earth, and they will be assisting others and causing them to be healed by what they are receiving, because what they're receiving is a spirit of truth, and it will not do what it wants to do. It will only do the will of the Father. Now, notice what it has now in verse 5. And in their mouths was found no God, for they are without fault before the throne of Yahweh. Now, this is a situation here. They have no guile, because the guile that's within our hearts, our ill intentions, and our mode of using our fellow man, this is actually what the guile is. And if we get past that and we put ourselves down, then we get this. We get this. This is part of working that hijacked ego out of us, or you want to call setting the passions and desires in order for the mental body. This is all aligning that so the physical, the emotional, and the mental are all set in order. And in this manner, the higher self opens up and flows into our world that we have right now. Now, the higher self, as we looked at, was where the priest took the sacrifice from the regular individual that came into the temple of his own free will to make a sacrifice. Now, symbolically, the person who came in and the person who took the sacrifice, which is the priest, and the animal, all three of them are one. But the animal is killed. And as the animal is killed, it is raised in a newness of life. Because now you have a priest who has access to that sacrifice, or certain parts of that sacrifice that is now awakened. And the functions of that priest is actually your higher self. And that priest is moving from the courtyard where the altar is, the bronze altar, not the golden altar, and the foot washing laver. Then he moves into the holy place. He has all that jurisdiction. That's all where he has jurisdiction to go. But the regular person don't have that. The regular person makes the sacrifice and goes out through the gate. But the priest has that. And what the priest is dealing with now is what you call the higher self, or the second heaven. And so what you have is the two different frequencies, if you want to call it that, or two different vibrations. They make peace and they become one mind, and they give their service to the Father. But this is when the higher self is flowing through to our body, to this lower world. Or the tabernacle of Yahweh is actually coming here in some capacity, and we have that frequency coming within ourselves. So the priest now is moving, and the priest is going inside the holy place, the regular priest, and he's coming outside of the holy place. He doesn't go inside the most holy place yet. Notice how he goes into the most holy place. Now the priest is considered the female principal to the high priest. This is a marriage. And the high priest has the regular priest, they supervise them. No different than Messiah's relationship with the called out ones. So if they are part of the body of that high priest, then they have access into the most holy place. This is where it is. They have access into this most holy place at this time. Now let's go over to Luke chapter 24. So we have the regular priest and his jurisdiction. This is all symbolic. This is all symbolic. We got to see this. And when we come and we give that sacrifice, and that sacrifice is accepted, it becomes burnt, if it's a burnt offering, and all of it is given to the Father. Then you have different sacrifices, such as the peace offering, the trespass offering, the sin offering. You have these different offerings that the priests take part of those things, and the individual who gives this sacrifice, it is said through this sacrifice that their sins are forgiven. But their sins are not forgiven with those physical rituals and ceremonies. That's not really where it's at. Our sins are forgiven when we live the things that Yahshua said to live, how he tells us to live, and then bring forth the real sacrifice, because we are the living sacrifices. And when we bring forth these living sacrifices, then the higher self is opened up to us. Then the priest, which is our higher self, functions with us, and these issues that we have within ourselves begins cleansing these things. So you make this sacrifice, and notice before the priest goes into the holy place, he washes his feet in the laver. This is you and myself when we decide to turn our lives and live in a particular way and give our service to the Father and determine, because this has to be a free will. This can't be someone forcing us, because we won't do it. If we're not feeling it, we're not ready, it's not going to happen. We have to come of our own free will, make that sacrifice. Our higher self now is going to be taken over, cleansing us, that we could actually go into the holy place. In the holy place, when you go into the holy place, on your left-hand side, you have the lamp. It's a 7-lamp lampstand. In the middle of the lampstand, you have one like the Son of Man. That's what you have. On his left-hand side, he has curses. On his right-hand side, it's blessings. But it's all light, because it creates balance to bring us to where we need to be. Now, what's happening now? The lampstand is lighting up the whole room, because it's an enclosed area. So it has to have light. Okay? And that light is removing all the darkness that's in there. Right across from there, you have the table of showbread that the showbread was on. And the showbread is the food for, they said, the 12 tribes, but it's not for the 12 tribes in the sense that it's for only Israel's 12 tribes. It's for all the tribes of the earth, which is considered the 12 systems of the body that we have here. This is what it is. So that food is what is for the individual. And that individual will take that food, but it's only for them. If you remember, the priest can't share this with anyone else. It's not for the common individual. It's not for them. It has a whole different frequency. It's a whole different level of food. It's not the food that we're dealing with when we are not aware, because the food that we're dealing with when we're not aware, it's the sacrificing out there, killing actually real animals, because we're on that level still. We're not seeing things in an expansive manner, so we're not seeing it mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. We're only seeing it physically. We still think that the guy that stole my bicycle down the road, we still think that that individual should die. We're not seeing what's happening. See, when we're in that holy place, we are at least awake to the point that we know Yahweh. Remember, in the 13 perfect attributes here, which is actually what comes down into the holy place from the only begotten Son across that void or ravine. So you have the 13 perfect attributes, and the first part of the 13 perfect attributes says Yahweh. Now we have to understand what that is, because once we're putting this together, we're going to really understand who we are. We're going to understand the power that you initially had. That power that you still could have access to. And that power comes through your faith, not the faith, through your faith. So let's go back again to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So we have the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. As the Father has life within himself, he gives it to the Son, that the Son may have life within himself. Now, in this physical world, when the Father and the Mother, which is the life, that's one in the Father, in the higher third heavens, and the second heavens also, they're one, and they bring forth creation in the only begotten Son. In the earth, though, the polarities has been split. So in the earth, what we think we have, or in the illusion of the earth, because everything is from the heavens coming down, we have a male gender and a female gender, two polarities. And they have to become one. When they become one, then they're able to be creative. Now, this is not just one in coming together as a union, but to be truly creative for the Father, we have to become one in mind also. Because that which is created from them, if it's not managed in the mode of the Father, then what happens, it becomes part of the disorder, and it actually starts working for the evil forces. because of the disorder that's in there. But when we know what's really going on, and we bring forth that fruit and keep that fruit in the teachings of the Father, then it grows up, and if it doesn't take on some kind of other vibration or frequency, it stays in the order of the creative power of the Father. And it stays there, and it creates for the Father. It expresses the Father. If it's not, it's going to express the dark forces. Now, in the higher world, the Father and the Spirit continues to live in the only begotten Son. And in all of its creation, coming everywhere, the Father is actually acting through the only begotten Son. And the Spirit is actually acting through the only begotten Son. Now, in this physical world that we have, you bring forth a child, and the parents are still living in that child. We don't see it that way because we see an individual over here in a physical body. But we have to understand the higher worlds, because you're not that body. We identify ourselves with that body, but we need to stop identifying ourselves with that body. We need to identify ourselves with who we are, who we truly are, which is that same power that has come from the Father and is in that body. Now, the physical body now, a son comes forth or a daughter, whatever the case is, the father and the mother still lives in that child through DNA. Because the DNA comes from both of them and lives in that child. Now, as they bring that child up, mentally, they also live in that child. They're living in that child based upon their teachings. So they're living in that child, and if they have truth, that spirit of truth that the Father has brought down to them, they are actually teaching that child the same thing in this physical world. And this child is taking this. And this child then will be expressing the Father in this physical world. Now, this is actually what it means when it says Yahweh, because Yahweh is in everything. The Father is in every part of the creation and functioning in the creation through the Son that everything has come together in. The Father has used that. The Father is still living in the Son, and the Spirit is still living in the Son, and all that is brought forth by the Son, they still live in that. And when we become connected back to the Father, then it will be said, the Father and the Son will make their home in us, because they'll function through us in the very same manner. This is what we're looking at. Now, in the second part of that, it says Yahweh Almighty. Yahweh Almighty. So we have Yahweh, and if we understand Yahweh now, Yahweh is that force that's living in everything. In a source. Source is spirit. Source is only begotten Son. And it says, this is the spirit, this is the blood, and this is the water, and these are one. In the law of Moshe, it says, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is your father, Yahweh is one. Those three are Yahweh, one. One. This is where everything is coming from. They function in everything. The second part of that, 13 perfect attributes, is Yahweh Almighty. Now, Yahweh is simply representing what source really is. And your source is Almighty. When we tap into that, you have the same power. When you tap into that, you could say to that mountain, just as Yeshua said, be moved from here to there, And it's only a small part of that faith you have to have, as much as a mustard seed, and you could do that. Imagine if you had a pumpkin seed. That's way bigger than the mustard seed. If you had an avocado seed, that's way bigger than the pumpkin seed. That's much more power. But only if you had the smallest of seeds, you will be able to say to a mountain, move from here to there, because you will have the same power over all the elemental forces in the earth. This is what the priest inherits. From the burnt offering that is given, remember what the priest's portion was. The shoulder, it was the cheek, and the entrails. And we talked about what those things meant. This is what you have now. So Yahweh is almighty, because Yahweh is in everything, just as the Father is in the Son, and the Spirit of the Father is in the Son, just as how the Son takes that very same Spirit and brought forth the creation. But what is going through in the creation? The will of the Father. So the Father still lives in that creation, in every part of it. So therefore, the Father now becomes omnipresent. He's in everything. The Spirit is in everything. And we live in that because we have expressed that outside of us, but it was first in us for us to express that into all the creation. It was first in you and me, and we projected this in our creation outwardly. As within, so without. Now the scripture tells us that greater is he that is in you. Because at your core is the Father, is source. We have to connect to that. We have to connect to Yahweh Almighty. We have to understand Yahweh is one. We have to understand that. When we're grabbing this now, this power that is in everything, the same power of the Father and the Son, that's all of creation, it is here. We are able to create with that. We create the outer world. And we project ourselves into that world we live in. As you make your bed, you lay in it. Whatever we create, we live in it. But we're doing that from forces that's within us mentally. Even in the physical world, you're creating from your imagination. And you're creating your outer world. Now, this is how everything is coming down. From the highest heaven, all the way down to us. This is what we're looking at. Now, I had asked you guys to go over to Luke 24, okay, and I had touched this scripture before, but I also wanted to bring it here to us. Let's go to verse 37. In verse 37 of Luke 24, it says, when he came through that door and stood in front of them and said, peace be to you, they were startled and terrified because they thought they were seeing a spirit. But it wasn't a spirit. Then he said to them, why are you frightened? Why do doubts arise in your mind? This is where our fight is. This is where the fight is. What is in our minds? He goes in verse 39 here and he says, see my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and look, for a spirit does not have flesh and bone, as you see that I have. It's a whole different body that hath flesh for them to touch and bone, but he had no blood in that. Because the life that was moving through that was not the same life that's in the physical body. The life that was moving through that was the life of the light the light body that was moving through him, the force of the Father which was moving through him, because he was right back into it. He was connected into it again. And he was able to bring forth this body. But now this body that he had with what was moving through it could shapeshift. Now we think shapeshifting is, it's scary. Because we have these reptilians, we're finding out that in certain frequencies, these reptilians can't hide from us. But everyone will be doing that. If you remember when Yahshua was walking, a couple of guys that were walking, and they were talking about what had happened in Jerusalem, that Yahshua had gotten killed, whatever the case is, and they were going through it, and they were walking together, and suddenly somebody appeared amongst them and started walking with them. And they did not recognize that it was Yahshua, because he didn't allow himself to be seen in that frequency that they would recognize that. And he spent the whole time with them. And they didn't figure it out until after he was gone. Because he didn't allow that. Because he had the power to not come before someone and for them to see him as they would recognize him totally. These are different bodies. In the spiritual world, or in the spirit world, he will do the very same thing. He could use different bodies. Just as he was displaying in the physical world. Different bodies. Now let's go over to Revelations 21. Let's look at verse 1. And here it says, "And I saw a new heaven." Now, this doesn't mean, what I'm talking about in Revelations, like I asked everyone, allow your consciousness to expand beyond just the physical things. So when you see new heavens here, this doesn't mean that when you look up, you won't be seeing something different. But we're not talking on the physical level today. We're talking on the mental level, the emotional level, the physical level, and the spiritual level. So here we're talking about new heaven. It's a new consciousness that you're going to have. Because when we wake up and we're allowed the tabernacle of Yahweh to come, Yahweh will be with men. And remember, we were talking about the 24 elders coming down through the 4 living creatures. This is also a spiritual thing, but this has other meanings. I'm just coming from this particular place of the bodies. And when it comes into humanity, which is 6, and the number of 6, it's expanding the consciousness. So the new heavens is a whole new consciousness. Okay? And the new earth, the earthly things, is talking about what we desire here. The desires. For the first kind of consciousness, and the first desires that we had, these are the ones who are redeemed. They don't have the same desires anymore. And their awareness and their consciousness is totally different. Because those things have passed away and there was no more sea. Well, we could look at that sea and we could say, well, the sea, there is no more governments all over the world that's subjecting us to certain things. Yeah, that's on the physical level. Say that. Because the saints are going to take over, right? However, the sea spiritually is also your emotions, the waters, the endocrine system, the water. It's also that. So if you look at it in a whole different manner, these unstable emotions, there is no more of that because you have come to a whole new consciousness and your passions and desires are totally different. And the adversary can't use us the way that they use us now. We won't be going through the struggles for childbirth as we're doing now, having to manage so hard because all of a sudden this person did that and I'm struggling with it myself and I'm hearing voices and I have to fight these voices. That won't be there anymore because I will not be having those same passions and desires. It won't be there. My consciousness will be totally beyond that. And I, Yachanan, saw the holy city, Yahweh Shema, coming down from Yahweh out of heaven. Out of heaven. This is not the third heaven now. This is the second heaven that you and I will be functioning with the higher self with. But it comes down out of Yahweh, out of the third, and it's prepared. Coming down from Yahweh, out of heaven, prepared as brides, or as a bride, adorned for their husbands, or their husband. Now, what we're looking at here, the bride is a female principle, and the husband is a male principle. And just as the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures, it said they bow down and worship them, this is not what it's really talking about. Because when we hear that, we think of people on their knees, all homage and this kind of stuff. Well, what they're really doing, they serve that purpose. They serve what the head is saying, or the head is doing. So this coming down now is coming down from our Father, adored as a bride for their husband, and the husband is the Messiah consciousness that's going to be moving through this. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, this heaven that is talking about now the bride is coming down out of the second heaven, and it says, behold, the tabernacle of Yahweh, or the dwelling place of Yahweh, or the consciousness of Yahweh, is with men. It has come down through the mental, through the emotional, and is dwelling in the physical world, and is expressing our Father now. And he will dwell with them, because that's where it's at now. The will of heaven, as Yahshua was telling us how to pray, that the will of heaven will be done in earth. This is what it has come to. The tabernacle of Yahweh, or the dwelling place of Yahweh, is with men. It's the second heaven that has come down. And they will be his people. And Yahweh himself will be with them and be their Father. And there are a weight to it, and the Spirit of the Father being in the fleshly individual, that individual is not cut off anymore in their consciousness and awareness. They are sons now. And what they will be doing is expressing the Father through the Spirit of truth, and be expressing the Father through the will of the Father. And there you have the Father is with them. And the Father lives in them and lives with them, because they have prepared a vessel or a home, and they have cleaned out everything that the dishonest manager had in there. Like we talked about the field. When someone, they found the kingdom of heaven, and they had to go and sell everything that they had to acquire this field. Well, the things that they were getting rid of was all those things that would cause the Father, Yahweh, one, the all, not to dwell in them, because that is our sacrifice. Our sacrifice really is to get rid of those things, is to let go of all those things. All those things that will cause the Spirit of the Father not to flow through to us. Now, we look at what Yahshua taught, we see this. That's what that really comes down to be. Exactly what Yahshua pretty much taught us. Now, we go to 4. Now, you have a whole new consciousness now. It's not the same thing that we had before. And we just got to realize that now. We don't have the same thing, the same awareness that we had before. It's totally different. So in that we have now, it says in verse 4, Yahweh, Yahweh Almighty, the first two, that's in the 13 perfect attributes. Yahweh Almighty, totally powerful. When Yahweh now is dwelling in that individual, and the consciousness is totally different, You look at things in a whole totally different way. And that power, that almighty power now that's in you, that power is going to wipe away all tears. It's going to remove all the pain. All the pain. And it's from your eyes, because you have a whole different understanding. Your knowledge base is totally different. This is what your eyes are going to be talking about, what you're seeing. It's going to remove all that from your eyes. And there will be no more death because of where we have come to. Now, it doesn't mean that the physical body still won't go down, but your consciousness, when you come into the physical body and you're dealing in the physical body in here, and there are other people who are not of the first fruit, so they're not necessarily where you are, yeah, they're going to be dying. As the scripture says, the child will die at 100 years old. Well, death is still there. But where you would have arisen to in consciousness, death will not be real for you. Because you will take a body in this physical world, and when you're ready to leave this physical world and move to another world because you're multidimensional, you simply put it down. You put it down and you move on. You could put it down and move on. You know that it's not death for you. So there's no more death. And the time will come that those also who are not of the first fruit, if we make it and we're doing this, after we have shown them and opened their eyes to everything, just as Yahshua opened our eyes to everything, they also will have no death. And then that enemy that's called death will be totally obliterated. And then at that time, everyone in this physical realm, earth, and everything in here will be turned back over to the frequencies of our Father, the frequency of our Father flowing right through, right to the creation in here, and the creation will be released from the bondage of corruption. So there's no more death, neither sorrow, neither crying, nor will there be any pain. For the former things, whether it's the system that was around us physically, but not that alone, because if the system is moved away physically and we're still the same people, we're going to create it again. We'll create the same thing again. So you need a different mentality here to maintain the new heavens and new earth. Or we're going to hijack it again and bring the same darkness in here. So what we have here is a new state of mentality, being different desires. Our desire body is not taking over the mental body anymore, but the desire body has given itself over to the mental body, and the mental body is actually in line with the higher mental body, which is what you would call the creative forces of the four living creatures, which is in line with the higher spiritual body, which is where we're dealing with the 24 elders, which is in line with the Messiah consciousness, which is actually what is represented in the second heaven. All those higher bodies, the higher mental body, the higher spiritual body, and Messiah consciousness, that's all in the second heaven. That second heaven comes down into this physical body because we have made the two men one. The desires that we have here in the earth that the ego uses to hijack our mental world is not happening anymore. We have realized what's happening, and we have come to the point that we are going to serve the higher forces. That's a sacrifice that we bring. Just as Yahshua brought forth the same sacrifice, and in that sacrifice that he brought forth, he came to the place that he realized who he was. And even though he knew now consciously that he was a spark of the Most High, even though he knew that, and he had the same power to do whatever, he did not seize it upon himself to be equal in that manner, but he humbled himself, taking the form of a servant. This is the same relationship that men and women should have in this earth, because it's the same thing that's above, the same thing that's below. A woman and a man, for who they are at the soul level, are equal. At the soul level, they're the same. As a matter of fact, they are one. But in the earth, they have taken on different vessels. And in the earth, they have to prove themselves to align themselves together and work as one. Because when they're able to work as one, they would both have fulfilled the job that they came into this earth to fulfill. And when they're able to do that, then what you have the man doing his job. And what is his job? Just as Messiah loved the called out ones and gave himself up for them, so also the male principle needs to do. And not only men or husbands, but you have women who play that same role. They may be a teacher in a school, and they have students. They just don't let the students move all over the place and do whatever, and like, okay, just let whatever be. This is what Taoism says. It's not necessarily like that. They're going to bring order in that system, and they're going to love those children, because that woman will be a male principal over those children who would be considered female principal. And she's going to bring forth life in them. But our system today is not like that. Our system today has been taken out of that groove, and all that we are creating is disorder for the dark ones. So everything is going to be removed. The former things is going to be taken away. This is the system that we're dealing with, and so the saints will rule again. Okay? But also within our own mental space, in our own passions and desires, our passions will not be the same, because we're going to align that with the mental force. The mental force will be getting the power of the second heaven, which is the higher self, to integrate with the individual who is walking this earth. And there will be oneness. And therefore, Yahweh will be in this earth functioning with everyone who are recognized as what you call that bride, or of that 144,000 that will be in the earth over this expanded period of time, functioning here as the collective body of Eve that were here before. They were here before. And they're the ones who fell. And they fell because the very same thing. The bodies was not lined up. So one thing was able to grab something from somewhere else, the dishonest manager, through the passions and desires, as we looked at in Genesis. And then that was able to be given to the male principle, and that was able to bring everything down and made the dishonest manager victorious over them for a time, because that's where death reigned. The dishonest manager brought forth death, and because we partook of that fruit, death reigned even until today. But when we make once again everything balanced, death is going to be swallowed up, because death is disorder. Death is part of the corruption that is in here. When we wake up and we understand that there is no corruption in us, and we can't be corrupted like these guys are talking about, how they tell us, and we wake from that, we could actually align ourselves and act consciously in this manner. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to move on back into what we were talking about before we decided to go into the body. And where we were at was talking about the 144,000 was in the most holy place, because in the most holy place, this is where you have Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And the Son, remember, these are one. And they bear witness in the earth. They bear witness everywhere. The only begotten Son now has brought forth creation in the second heaven. And what the Son has is what the Father has within himself. And so what the Son brought forth in the creation is the 13 perfect attributes, because that's the power of the Father. That 13 perfect attributes goes down into the 24 elders, because the same system that you have in the earth, the 4 living creatures, if you look at that as your 4 lower energy centers, and you look at the 24 elders as that which is around the throne, the head, and it comes down to the shoulders over your throat chakra, because it covers the top 3 chakras. So this is what you have there. And you have the 24 elders. Now, the 24 elders are taking these 13 perfect attributes, but the 24 elders in the second heaven, they're not doing what we're doing here. Because what we're doing, we're allowing our passions and desires to take over. They're not there. They're just like this is saying right here, when the new heavens and the new earth takes over and the new consciousness take over, they already have that consciousness. The higher man already has that consciousness. Your higher self already has that, because that's what's functioning there. So you have the 4 living creatures, that's part of your higher man, your higher self, which is the creative forces. In this lower body, you would have one center, which would be your heart, which would be your desire. But in the second heaven, it's clean. No lower passions and no lower desires. In your stomach chakra, you have all the willpower and the intuition that you have in there. Well, the second heaven has the same thing in the 4 living creatures. In the sacral chakra, you have the creative power and energy. Well, that's what they have there too. In the 4 living creatures, the creative power. And in your root chakra, you have that which grounds you. And that's the same thing you have. And it grounds you and gives you stability when it's functioning right. In the 4 living creatures, that's what you have. That comes down, the 24 elders brings forth the 13 perfect attributes down into the 4 living creatures to bring forth creation across the Ravine into our, what you call the body of man, which we have shown the division that is 3. When that is functioning in that manner, this is where we're going to find the spiritual and the mental and the desire part of Revelations 21 that we just got done reading right here. This is what we're going to be seeing. I hope what I'm saying kind of clicks, because I know it's kind of moving into different areas. But hopefully next week we'll be able to go into where we left off at, talking about the temple, the 144,000, and we'll be able to continue with the higher self. And with that, I'll turn everything back over to